Good evening, everybody.
What do you want me to do?
Good evening. Everybody doing okay tonight? All right, good. So, let's jump right into it. But first, they tell the story of a man who was down on his luck a bit, and his business was tanking. Everything seemed to be going awry, and slowly but surely, he was left with nothing. And he was consulting people to help him out of his struggles, consulted business partners, consulted a psychologist, and finally his last hope in helping him to fix himself was asking his rabbi. He was talking to his rabbi. And so he came to the rabbi and he said, "My business is tanking. Everything about my life seems to be falling apart. I have tremendous debt, and I don't know how I'm going to climb out of it." And so the rabbi didn't know what to say. And so he looked at the man, and he thought to himself of the first thing that could come to his mind. And he told the man, "The answer to your question is in your hands. What you need to do is you need to take a copy of the Torah and go to the beach and sit in a lawn chair by the beach with your copy of the Torah. And then what's going to happen is a gust of wind will blow by, the book will open, and whatever page it opens to, the solution to your problems can be found on that page." And so the man was very excited. He took his copy of the Torah, he went down to the beach, he sat in a lawn chair. He did exactly as the rabbi had told him. Several months went by. The rabbi hadn't seen this individual. And then he bumps into him in a supermarket with a whole shopping cart full of food. It seemed that things had turned better for this person. And so the rabbi said, "You seem to be doing much better now. Doesn't look like you're in debt. You look like you're in nice clothes. I see you have a nice car parked out front. What happened?" He said, "I took your advice, and it worked." "So what do you mean you took my advice?" He said, "You mean you went down to the ocean with your copy of the Torah?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You mean you sat in a lawn chair and waited for the wind to blow by?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "And when the wind blew by and opened up the Torah, you looked for your answer on that page, and there it was?" He said, "Yes." He said, well, what did it open to?" He said, "Chapter 11. The point is that in our lives, the outside picture can look a lot different than what's going on underneath the surface. The outside picture can look very different than what's going on under the surface. The truth of the matter is, the subject of tonight's talk is the mechanics of positive thinking. And my goal is that by the end of the evening, everyone in this room will have familiarity as to how positive thoughts influence to make a positive reality. The mechanics of how it works. Sort of the spiritual physics. Sound like fun?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So the first thing we all know is that there's more to reality than meets the eye. But one of the basics of Judaism is that our actions influence not only ourselves, but they change the world around us. Our sages teach that when a person does something that they're supposed to do, when they do a mitzvah, not only do they uplift themselves, but they uplift the entire universe as well. And the same thing, if a person does the opposite, not only are they lowering themselves, they're also lowering the universe around them. So it's bread and butter, it's basics of Judaism that our actions influence the world around us. it's also basic bread and butter, basic foundation of Judaism, that our speech also has an influence on the world around us. How many times do we tell our kids, when they get upset, they say something nasty about somebody else? Maybe sometimes they even say that they hope something bad happens to somebody else. How many times do we say, and that's a good thing to say, oh, don't say that. How could you say that? Why? It's only words. I mean, the words really have meaning. The words really have power. And the point is that deep down, we kind of know that they do. We know that words can influence our reality. Not only what's going on inside, but they can actually change the world around us. Our inclination is to tell our kids, don't say that, because we don't want it to affect reality. We don't want that it should actually happen. Many of you probably know the very famous story of Baal Shem Tov. It's in Hayom Yom. And Baal Shem Tov, one day in his synagogue, after the prayer service, one of the men got into a fight with another man, and the tensions were heated. And before long, it was an outright fight, verbally yelling at each other. And one of the individuals became so upset that he screamed at the other person, I'm going to tear you apart like a fish. And at that point, everyone in the synagogue froze. The Baal Shem Tov told everyone who was present, come stand in a circle. Put your arms on each other's shoulders. And he basically walked them through a guided meditation. And as they closed their eyes and listened to the words of the Baal Shem Tov, everyone who was present began to holler and scream. Because what they saw was the individual who screamed actually tearing apart the other person like a fish. And the Baal Shem Tov's point was that when we speak, the words that we say in some realm, in some reality, actually happen. They actually take place. Reality is actually changed by our speech. Our sages teach that Lashon Hara, that speaking negatively about somebody else, negatively affects three people, three individuals. Number one, the person who spoke badly. Secondly, the person who listened to the thing that they shouldn't be listening to. They listened to the Lashon Hara. And the third one, kind of puzzling, is the one that the Lashon Hara was spoken about. Now, I understand that it negatively affects the one who said it, because they should be talking about those things. And I understand that it negatively affects the one who's listening. Why? Because you shouldn't be listening to those types of things. But what about the person that it was said about? What if he never finds out about it? He never knows that something bad was said about him. Our sages teach that it still negatively affects the person. Why? Because just by speaking negatively about somebody actually lowers them. The same thing can be said that when we speak praiseworthy about somebody, when we acknowledge someone's good points, it actually brings them up. So when we speak in positive words about a person, whether they know about it or not, it actually brings them up, lifts them up. So our speech has meaning. Our speech carries with it weight. We just finished a month ago, the day of the year, the evening of the year, where Jews from far and wide, doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter what your affiliation is the whole rest of the year, most Jews in America, by hook or by crook, find themselves in a synagogue Kol Nidre night. Kol Nidre night. Kol Nidre, all my vows. The one night a year that everyone's coming to synagogue. The prayer service that everyone's coming together for is all my vows? I haven't done anything worse this year? The point is that our vows, our speech, carries meaning. It can transform our reality for better or for worse. The idea of our speech influencing the reality around us is not just present in a Torah context. Some of you may be familiar with an experiment that was done about 10 years ago by Dr. Masaru Emoto, a Japanese scientist. And he did what became known as the ice crystals experiment. And he wanted to test if you were able to chart, if you were able to see tangibly how speech can affect the world around you. And in the experiment, what they did was they took water from a spring, and they put the water into a petri dish, a little dish. And over one petri dish, they had a group of people who were speaking positive things, who used positive words. They said, "You're so nice, you're so handsome, you're so wonderful," all good, positive things with good, positive energy behind it. And then over the other petri dish, they had people saying negative things, a whole group of people. "You're so ugly, you're so stupid, I hate you." All sorts of bad things, all sorts of negative energy. And what they did was they froze the water droplets in a freezer that was negative 250 degrees Celsius. And then they took it out, they magnified the little ice droplets, little ice crystals. And what they found is that the petri dish, the ice crystals that were formed with all of the negative energy around it, the ice crystals that formed were very jagged, very nonsensical. But when it came to the ice crystals that were formed with the positive things around it, they were perfectly symmetric, they were aesthetically pleasing, they were very nice. It was a pretty famous experiment, and it got some traction in some documentaries. There was a similar experiment done with an Israeli chemist and physicist named Tomer Rabiev and Arik Naveh. They did a similar experiment with watering lima beans, and water which had good things said over it, and had negative things said out over it, and then they had a control where nothing was said out of it. And there was a progression that those that had the lima beans that grew from the water that there was negative things said over, it took them much longer, they grew much more cockeyed, whereas the water that positive things were said over it, it grew much faster, much greener, much more lush. Now, again, take these experiments as you will. Okay? The point is not necessarily, and my personal interest is not necessarily in the actual results that came out, not necessarily the conclusions that came out, but just the fact that the secular world is accepting of the fact, or is open to the idea, that our speech can change reality, that our speech can change, literally influence material reality, says a lot. It says a lot that we are moving, as a society, as a global society, in fact, we are moving slowly away from a purely materialistic view of the world. We are moving to a place where words or consciousness, we're opening the door that these types of things can affect the world that we live in. So, again, pillar of Judaism, our actions affect ourselves and the world, that our speech affects ourselves and the world. And what about thoughts? David Einhorn is the name of a Wall Street guru who has a technique called value investing. And the way that he makes his investment is thinking positively about a certain investment when everyone else is thinking negatively about that investment. And he seems to be doing very well. The idea is that, once again, in the secular world, we're becoming more open to the idea even that thought can influence the reality that we live in. I was told recently by a cardiologist friend of mine that they did a study with children who had terminal illness and the game Pac-Man. Everyone remember the game Pac-Man? Right? So for the guys, it'll be Pac-Man. For the ladies, it'll be Mrs. Pac-Man. Right? Everyone remember the game? The little chompy guy? So the experiment was that they took these terminally ill children, and they had a certain control in the way they were measuring it, and what they told the kids was to play Pac-Man, and they said, pretend you are Pac-Man, and the little chompy things, little munchy things, are your cancer. And the children who participated in this study, they happened to significantly improve from where they were the week before. Again, this was published in medical journals. This is something that is open to discussion currently in the medical world, in the secular world. The idea that our thoughts, the thoughts that we have, can influence not only ourselves, not only our health, not only our well-being, but can actually influence the world around us, actually change and transform the reality that we live in. So this really became popular also about 10 years ago when there was a book called The Secret that was published. And The Secret, basically the whole premise of The Secret is that if you want something bad enough, if you're send out your message, that your desires to the universe, that the universe somehow will bring it to you. Right? We'll talk about what the Torah's view on that might be a little later, but the fact of the matter, once again, is that even in a secular setting, a secular society, we're considering the idea that our thoughts influence the reality that we live in. What does Torah think of all this? Obviously, at the end of the day, as Jews, Torah has to be our focus. If the Torah is open to something, then we know that it's good for something, it's something that we should embrace. If the Torah is not open to something, it's something we should close the book on. Torah is our night vision goggles. Torah gives us a perception of what reality actually is. You know, the Talmud tells a very famous story that just before a child is born, when the child is still in the womb, it says that two things happen to the child. Number one, it is shown the entire world from the beginning to the end, shown a vision of the entire world, and secondly, it's taught the entire Torah from beginning to end. Then, once the baby is born, once the child is born, a malach gives a little slap, and the child, it says, forgets all of the Torah that it learned. Now, I have a question for you. The Talmud only mentions that the child forgets the Torah that it learned. It never says that it forgets being shown from one end of the world to the other. So fine, the child forgets the Torah, but how come we can't remember what the world looks like from one end of the world to the other? And the answer is, because if a person doesn't have Torah, he can't see anything. There is no clarity without Torah. There is no vision without Torah. So, our subconscious, where our negative thoughts come from, if it's left unrectified, if it's left to its own devices, tends to gravitate towards the negative. Tends to gravitate in a not so hot direction. Only through positive thoughts, active engagement with positivity, positive thoughts, and in particular Torah thoughts, can our subconscious be refined, and we can look at the world finally in a positive way. Right? Like the Gemara says, the Talmud says, Ein Tov El Torah. The greatest good is Torah. So if a person has Torah thoughts in their mind, if they've ingested it and really living with the concept, it penetrates into our subconscious and affects the way that we look at the world. It's just the way that it works. You know, we know this famous story. It's coming up in a few weeks in the Parsha about Yosef. Ostensibly, his brothers are very jealous of him, and they decide one day that they're going to throw him in a pit. And we know that when they throw him in a pit, the Torah tells us something redundant, or seemingly redundant. It says that when they threw Joseph in the pit, when they threw Yosef in the pit was empty, there was no water in it. It repeats itself. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Well, that should be need to say that's not necessary. So our sages say, the commentary is right, that it was empty of water, the thing that the pit is usually filled with, but it had instead snakes and scorpions. And the truth of the matter is that if the pit does not have water in it, the natural outcome, the natural result will be that the pit will have snakes and scorpions. And it will be filled with snakes and scorpions. Now, the truth of the matter is that this pit is really our brain. It's our mind that can be filled with one of two things. If it's not filled with water, and in the Talmud, the Gemara in Baba Basra says that Torah is likened to water, right? Water is symbolic of the refreshing flow of Torah wisdom. If our mind, if the pit is not filled with Torah, if it's not filled with positivity, what's the only other result? What's the natural result that's going to happen from it? It's going to be filled with snakes and scorpions. So one way, the most effective way, and people tell me all the time, you know what, I'm naturally a negative person. I'm negative. I think about things in a negative fashion. I can't help it. I don't want to be like that, but I am negative. So the point, the clue that the Torah gives us on how to get rid of that is that we don't try to fight the negativity. We just simply add water. Because by adding water, we get rid of the snakes and scorpions. Adding water means adding Torah, adding positivity, and really digesting what we're learning, really digesting what we're speaking about. You know, a few weeks ago, at my house, I have 5 little kids. My oldest is 7, my youngest is 1.5. And my twins, I have 5-year-old twins, they love playing with this little those like little plastic toy pools, those little plastic swimming pools. You can get them at Target or wherever. Kids love to play with them in the summer, especially. You fill it up. It's like these. So we put the hose in, and they usually go. And our baby likes to sit in that, and that's like her swimming pool. Okay. So my twins, God bless them, they don't like to use it as a swimming pool. They like to instead fill it with dirt. They fill it with dirt, they fill it with rocks, they fill it with all sorts of stuff. They turn it more into a sandbox than anything else. So, a few weeks ago, it was still summer. You could still go swimming in Florida. Now it's in the 70s, so we're all freezing. But a few weeks ago, when it was still considered summer, you could still go swimming. My little baby wanted to go in the little baby pool. The only problem was that my twins had filled up the entire little kiddie pool with rocks and boulders and sand, and it was really, really heavy. And my wife asked me, can you go empty that pool so we can fill it up with water and let the baby go swimming for a little bit? And despite what many of you were thinking, beneath this jacket, many of you think that there's a muscle-bound physique underneath. I'm here to tell you that it's not true. I'm not as strong as I look. And I tried lifting this little swimming pool. It was filled with rocks and sand and mud, and I couldn't do it. It was way too heavy for me. And so what I did instead was I just stuck the hose inside, turned the water on, and after about 5 minutes, all of the rocks and boulders and sand and all the other stuff was out. You just add water. You don't have to actually toss out the gunk. You don't have to get out the mud. You don't have to get out the stuff that you don't want, the snakes and scorpions, the rocks, the sand, the garbage. You just add water. So there's a really interesting thing that is brought out from a story that maybe most of you have heard, but there's an interesting little twist in what we can derive from it. The Talmud tells a very famous story about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, we all know, is a very famous teacher who would go from town to town teaching his wisdom to those who were in each town. And one time, Rabbi Akiva went to a specific town, and he was seeking lodging for the night. He knocked on the door. "Hi, I'm Rabbi Akiva. You might have heard of me. May I please have a room to sleep in tonight?" And the first one said, "My in-laws are in town. There's no bed. I have no extra bed. Our house is under construction." Each one down the line in the neighborhood had some reason or some excuse why Rabbi Akiva couldn't sleep there that night. But Rabbi Akiva had a mantra. Rabbi Akiva had a saying that he lived by. An Aramaic saying, "Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi." Everything God does, He does for good. Everything that happens is for the good. And so Rabbi Akiva said, "Okay, I can't find lodging for the night. I'll go in the field. I'll just go sleep in the field. Big deal." When Rabbi Akiva traveled, he traveled with a few things. He traveled, number one, with a donkey to lug his stuff. He traveled with a rooster that he could wake up on time to pray. And he also traveled with a candle that even in the evening he could study. So he went with all of these things into the field and just slept in the field that night, preparing his things. All of a sudden, a gust of wind blows by, the candle goes out, and we can't study. Great. Right? But Rabbi Akiva lived by a mantra, "Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi." Everything God does, He does for good. It's all good, man. A few minutes later, a fox comes by and eats his rooster. Great, now he can't wake up on time. So most of us would think that we're having the night from HE double hockey stick. But Rabbi Akiva had a mantra. Rabbi Akiva's mantra was, "Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi." Everything God does, He does for good. It's all good. A few minutes later, a lion comes on and eats his donkey. So now he can't move anywhere, he can't go anywhere. He doesn't have a rooster, he can't wake up on time, he can't study Torah. So what he does, he says, "Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi." Everything God does, He does for good. And he just went to sleep that night. In the morning when he awoke, he saw that the village that he sought lodging in had been ransacked by the Romans. And people were stolen from, people were murdered, all the worst things in the world. And if Rabbi Akiva would have gotten lodging over there, if he would have had a place to sleep over there, he would have been involved, he would have suffered as well. And additionally, if all the commotion was going on as the city was being ransacked, and his donkey would hee-haw in the field with all the commotion, or his rooster would cock-a-doodle-doo in the field, or his candle would be lit in the darkness of the field, he would also have been spotted and also been a victim of the situation. So Rabbi Akiva noticed in retrospect, sometimes we can only know in retrospect, Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi, everything that happens is for the good. Now, a little Kabbalistic footnote that comes out of that. So we all know that in Jewish mystical thought, the idea of numerology, gematrias, that each letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a corresponding number that goes with it. And that certain words or phrases or whatnot that have similar numeric values share a certain theme, share a certain idea, share a certain concept. Anyone want to take a stab at what the numeric value of Rabbi Akiva's mantra, "Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi" is? Who's the mathematicians in here? Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi equals 611. Close. 611, which is the same numeric value as the word Torah. And the point is that if a person ingests Torah in their life, they will see the world in a way of Kol da'avi rachmana l'tav avi. Everything God does, He does for good. The more we ingest Torah, the more we incorporate Torah into our psyche, into our way of thinking, we will be able to better view the world as a great place, as a good place. Now, what about this idea that the secret has, from a Torah perspective?
that if you put your thoughts out there in the universe, that somehow, some way, the universe will bring it back your way. Good stuff will come your way if you put it out there. How does that work in a Torah mindset? So, first of all, you have to know that whenever secular people, whenever it's discussed in secular circles, whenever they say the universe, they really mean it's God. You just can't say God. So how does Torah see this idea? And the idea is really very much connected with the idea, the difference in Jewish thought between the idea of emunah, faith, and bitachon, trust. Now, faith and trust in a lot of people's mind are the same thing, or that trust is maybe a deeper or a lot of faith, right? Someone who has faith, right? And someone who has a lot of faith has trust. It's not how it works. Having faith and having trust are two entirely different things in a Jewish context. You can have faith that something exists and not have trust of it at all. I have faith, I believe there's a U.S. government, but I don't trust them. Faith and trust, belief and trust, are two different things entirely. Faith in Judaism, emunah, means that you believe that somehow, in the grand scheme of things, even if the way that something appears to you to be negative, that you believe, you have faith, that somehow this is good. Somehow this is for the good. That's emunah. That somehow, some way, this is a means to an end, or this somehow, in some way, looking at it, is good or for the good. That's emunah. Bitachon, trust, is something very different. And it's something that really can take a lifetime to achieve. Bitachon means that you are committed with absolute certainty that God is not only going to show you good in the grand scheme of things, but that God is going to show you good in a way that you can relate to the good. A good that you can see with your own two eyes that this is good. You go with such assuredness, you have such confidence that this is going to be the result. And that it actually transpires. And the greatest example of this from the Torah mindset actually teaches us a tremendous lesson in our own life. The Torah tells us that Moses, when he was in Egypt, he saw the Egyptian taskmaster beating up on a Jewish slave. And he doesn't like what he sees, and he winds up killing the Egyptian taskmaster. Not too long after that, he sees two Jews fighting. I know. I couldn't believe it either. Two Jews fighting. Who would have thought? He sees two Jews fighting. And he goes over and says, "Hey, come on, guys, break it up. What's going on over here?" And so one of the Jews answers back to him, "What, are you going to kill one of us like you killed the Egyptian?" And then the Torah tells us that Moses became frightened because the matter had become known. And then right after that, we're told that Pharaoh found out about the incident and sought to slay Moses. He wanted to kill Moshe. Now, the Torah very rarely tells us the emotional experiences of our forefathers. Abraham was happy. Isaac was sad. Jacob was glad. So the fact that the Torah mentions the emotional status, the frightenedness, the scaredness that Moshe was experiencing is meant to direct our attention towards that account and give us a lesson that we can live with. Why the juxtaposition? Why is it put together, this idea that Moses was scared, and that immediately afterwards it says that Pharaoh finds out about the incident and seeks to slay Moses? What's it teaching us? The idea is that the reason that Pharaoh sought to slay Moses was because that for one moment, Moses, who was at the epitome of faith, the epitome of trust, the absolute pinnacle of all you can achieve, for one moment he lost his sense of trust that things were going to be good, that things will better. And because he viewed the world as scary, because he was scared, the world that he lived in became a scary place. The world that he lived in became scary. And Pharaoh then heard about it and sought to slay him. In other words, this is a teaching of the Rebbe that if the fact that Moses, the fact that Moshe saw the world in that way, that made that the world, that sort of entered into that dimension, that he walked into a scary reality. You know, the famous account that the Chassid of Tzemach Tzedek came to him and said that his child was sick, and Tzemach Tzedek told him, instructed him that you have to think good and things are going to be good. And he said that I'm not telling you this as like wishful thinking, hopeful hopes, right? We're talking about this, that this is the reality, that thinking about something actually enhances the reality that we live in, actually transforms the reality that we live in. I want to digress for a second and talk to you about the spiritual physics of how it works. This is actually really fascinating. How is it that we can gain a clear picture of that? Why should what I think, how is it that what I think actually transforms the world around me? How does it work? What's the mechanics of it? So here's how it works. The way that it works, this is something that, even if we're not on the pinnacle of trust and faith in our own life, and we can't necessarily, achieve that level of Moshe. This is something that we can think of and conceive of in our daily life, how it works, and perhaps influence each of us to think about things a little bit more positively, because it actually does enhance the reality. The way that it works is like this. The reality that we live in is composed of many dimensions. So what that means to a physicist would mean that, okay, so one-dimensional reality is just a point, right? Just a dot, 1 point. Or just one direction, length, let's say. Two-dimensional reality is length and width. So any photograph you've ever seen, any painting you've ever seen, only exists in a two-dimensional reality, right? Just length and width, right? There's just two dimensions to it. Every photograph, you can only go this way, right? This way, or this way. It's all that exists. Pac-Man, like we talked about earlier, Pac-Man is a two-dimensional game, right? So Pac-Man, when he goes chopping along the line, he can only go left, right, up, and down. In two-dimensional reality, there's just length and width. Now, what happens when we go into the third dimension? There's depth as well. And that's the reality that we're most used to. That's how we operate. We operate in a three-dimensional world, right? You can go up, you can go down, you can go side to side, you can also go forward and backwards. We live in a three-dimensional reality. Now, what would happen? What would happen if you found magical 4D sunglasses, right, like in a genie bottle or something? You were able to put on 4D glasses. What would the world look like in 4D? The fourth dimension is time. And so what that means is that if you were to look at the world with 4D glasses on, time would be of no substance. See, in three-dimensional world, time is broken up into different moments. There's now, and then there's now, and then there's now. And there's an infinite amount of consecutive seconds that make up different moments. We experience time as a reality. But if you had 4D glasses on, time would be of no thing. You would see everything happening at one simultaneous moment. And what that means, if you look at your friend, if you look at the person across the table from you with 4D glasses on, you'd see them from the beginning of their life to the end of their life. Everything, right, beginning to end, womb to tomb, would be existing in one simultaneous moment. Time would be of no meaning. It would be existing simultaneously at one moment. And so that means that if you looked at the world with 4D glasses on, everything that happened since the beginning of time and everything that would happen until the end of time would all be happening in one simultaneous moment. Everything on the timeline of history that ever took place and ever will take place, all happening at the same moment. Now again, in us living in 3D world, like this beyond time idea is hard for us to imagine, but this is what it would look like. This is actually something that's discussed in several Sfarim. This is the way in which people who have near-death experiences describe their experience as being timeless, being beyond time. This is how Rav Dessler speaks about what happens to the neshama when the soul is able to experience reality after it leaves the confines of the body, that it experiences what life is like beyond the realms of time, right? Where past, present, and future are all operating at the same time. But if we were to look at the world, if we could experience the world with 4D glasses on, we would see everything from the beginning of time, everything that happens on the timeline of history, all to the end of time happening in one simultaneous moment. And we're going to go to the fifth dimension. We're going to stop there or else all of our brains explode. And this is where our topic tonight comes in. We said, once again, that the 4D realities, everything that ever happened on the timeline of history, and everything that will happen, all happening in one simultaneous moment. Right? So what would the fifth dimension be? What's fifth dimensional living? Fifth dimension means that along that timeline of history, right, only one thing can actually transpire in reality. But in the fifth dimension, all of the potential realities that could have been at any given moment are also all existing. So meaning only one thing can transpire in the physical world. Only one thing can actually happen. But in 5D world, in the fifth dimensional reality, anything that could have happened at any given moment is also of substance. Right? Only one thing can actually happen, but at any moment there's an infinite amount of things that could have happened. Right? I can walk like this, or I could fall. Or I could stand on the table. Only one thing is actually going to transpire in reality. But at every single moment of our lives, there's an infinite amount of possibilities. There's an infinite amount of possible futures, future portals that we can step into that we walk into that reality. Now again, only one thing can actually transpire in the physical world, can only happen in the realm of action. But where can we access? Where is a place that we can access all of the potential realities that are possible to happen at any given moment? In our thoughts. In our thoughts. Our thoughts can comprehend, can have a sense of all of the possible realities that could possibly come out from any given situation. All the potential realities that don't come into fruition, only one will actually come into fruition, but our thoughts can play out the scenario in an infinite amount of ways. And when we think positively, when we zero in on a specific way of thinking, of specific reality, a specific result that we are hoping for, it helps bring that potential reality, that potential existence, from the potential to the actual. That should be here in the present, in a real, formidable, in a tangible way. I'd like to conclude with a story. If you haven't been listening the entire night, I hope that you'll at least enjoy this story. It's something to walk away with, something to sort of shape the way that we think about things in our life. They tell you there's a story of a man who had lived out his time in the world. He finished his years, and he was waiting to enter into the pearly gates of heaven. And he's sitting there in heaven's waiting room, and the angel who's taking attendance to the next person to be admitted says, "All right, Mr. Epstein," we'll call him Mr. Epstein. "Mr. Epstein, you lived a phenomenal life. Welcome to heaven. Come right this way." So Mr. Epstein says, "Oh, thank you very much. Very excited." But angel, I have a question for you. You may have never gotten this question before, but can you do me a favor? Can you just show me what the other place looks like? I don't want to stay there. I don't want to, go there permanently. But I've heard about it. My life, books, videos. I've heard about the other place. Can you just show me what it looks like? And so the angel said, well, I've never gotten this request before, but you know what? You lived a great life. I'll show you. I'll take you down there. So they go down, all the way down the divine elevator, all the way down to H-E double hockey stick. And Mr. Epstein is looking in the window of hell. And it's very puzzling to him because it's not the picture, it's not the image that he imagined it to be. He was expecting devils and pitchforks and lava. And what he saw instead was what appeared to be the grand ballroom of a cruise ship, with a long, elaborate table and well-dressed individuals on both sides of the table. Then out come the waiters in their tuxedos with food that looks delicious. The steam is rising up, and the waiters place the food on the table in front of everybody who's sitting at it. And they lift off the lids, and the steam comes out. The food is piping hot, just ready to be eaten. And everyone's mouth is watering. They're ready to jump into the food. And they lift up their hands in order to eat this delicious treat. And attached to their hands are a fork and a knife that are 4 feet long. And they can't eat the food that's in front of them because the silverware is just too long. And they're trying to eat the food that's on their plate, but attached to their hands is this long silverware, and they can't get to it. So the people start screaming and crying that they see this delicious food in front of them, but they just can't get to it. They just can't eat it. And Mr. Epstein says, Angel, I can't take all this suffering. Please take me back upstairs. Take me back to heaven. So they go back up to heaven. Mr. Epstein walks into heaven, and he sees a very familiar picture. He sees once again what appears to be the grand ballroom of a cruise ship, with very long, elaborate table and well-dressed individuals on both sides once again. Then out come the waiters in their tuxedos with their food that's piping hot. Obviously the food in heaven is not kosher. And they place the food in front of everybody. And they lift off the lids once again, and the steam comes out. The food is piping hot, looks delicious, and everyone's mouth begins to water. And once again, they lift up their hands, ready to dig in, but attached to their hands, once again, is a fork and a knife that are 4 feet long, and they can't eat the food that's in front of them. So everyone in heaven starts feeding the person across from them. And everyone's able to eat. And this story really is the story of our life. That two people could be born to the same backdrop. People could live and grow up in the same backdrop. Grow up in the same neighborhood, the same kind of family, go through the same type of experiences, have the same type of teachers, same type of friends, same economic status, same religious background, all the things the same. One person lives a life of heaven, one person lives a life of the opposite. And oftentimes, what the difference is the way in which we use the tools. Both were given the same tools. But what's my perspective? If my perspective is, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of it? Me. I'm not going to feed myself. What's in it for me? The selfish motives. Oftentimes, that person lives a life of hell. Inside. But if the person's perspective, again, same backdrop, same tools, but the focus is on what can I do for another? How can I pay it forward? How can I do the next good thing? What is the thing that I can contribute to the world around me? What's my place in the world? Thinking outside of yourself, thinking about the giving, the person oftentimes lives a life of heaven. And we know that our afterlife experience is similarly a reflection of the way that we live our life. The point is, each one of us has been given tools. We've all been given a backdrop. We've all been given tools. We all have great talents. We all have great abilities. We all don't by chance find ourselves in the place in which we are today. We have unique abilities. We have unique placement. We have all the tools that we need. If we focus our perspective on making a difference in the world, doing it, and going out there and looking at the world in that type of way, life is going to be good for all of us. I'd like to say l'chaim on this water right here. L'chaim, everybody. I wish and bless all of you that all of your lives, all the tools that you have, and all the backgrounds that you're coming from, and all the places that you live and people that you influence, that you utilize all your talents, all your passions, all your abilities for all the positivity and all the light that you share with the world around you should be reflected and come back to you 1,000-fold over, and should have continuous blessings in an unending way. Chaim.
We're having a base tal in a few minutes, if you're listening in.
Before we begin the next segment of the program, the Farbrengen, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Rabbi Taylor before we continue with the Farbrengen? Anyone have anything they want to comment, question, criticism, tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, or long forks? Thank you very much, Rabbi Taylor. Okay, everyone, please come a little closer. Rabbi Taylor is going to speak about the Chav Cheshvan and his experience in the Shlichus. And let's get together and let's get involved.
Let's finish this video and start a new one.
Turn off.
Turn it off? Thank you for joining us.